Hey folks, today I'm going to be reacting to an interview with Dr. Mpho Phalatse, who is the former mayor of Johannesburg. And this interview is presented by Biz News TV. Biz News is an organization that reports on finance, politics, and economics in South Africa. So let's get started.
In today's big interview, we talk with Dr. Mpho Phalatse, until recently mayor of Johannesburg and head of the Democratic Alliance in the city.
Just a quick reminder, the Democratic Alliance is the main political opposition in South Africa to our ruling party, the African National Congress.
Dr. Phalatse, good to be talking with you. It's been a hectic year. I think it was 10 months that you were mayor of Johannesburg. Before we get into that, how did politics grab you? How did you get attracted into that, into the service of your fellow, in this case, as ratepayers?
Well, I'm a medical doctor by profession, so I trained to heal patients. But with time, I realized that you can't heal patients without healing the environment that they live in. And, the WHO talks about the social determinants of health, and they talk about health in all policy. So, in order for you to effectively address healthcare issues, you need to address upstream determinants. And that talks to access to decent housing, access to clean running water, clean energy, employment, access to adequate nutrition, and so on. And as a doctor, you feel so frustrated when you treating this diabetic patient that's unemployed, doesn't have access to proper food. You're giving them all the meds, and they're just not improving, and you end up losing them. So I was frustrated, and that's how I got drawn into public administration. So I came to Johannesburg in 2011 to specialize in public health medicine, which is really public admin with a focus on health care. And it's a 4-year program at Wits University. At the end of the 4 years, I found myself at Alex Clinic, where I did casualty sessions. And there again, I was confronted by abject poverty in Alexandra, and people's lived experiences were just unbearable, even for me as an observer. And I was just too troubled to not do anything about it. And after a few conversations, I realized the only way was to get into politics. The idea was to be a part-time counselor and to be based in Alexandra, drive issues around Alex and see if we can improve their living conditions. And that's really what the aim was. I was still going to continue with my medical practice on the side and other business that I was busy with. But things did not turn out that way. We ended up in a coalition government, and I was appointed to the then Mayor Herman Mashaba's cabinet as the MMC for Health and Social Development, which is a full-time position, so I had to drop everything else. The rest is history.
Yeah, indeed it is. But you would then, I presume, describe yourself like Athol Trollip describes himself, as a conviction politician, not a career politician.
I struggle self-identifying as a politician at all. I'm a politician by virtue of what I do, but I don't see myself that way, and that's not my natural inclination, actually. And you'll see if you observe how I operate, you'll notice that I'm really not. I'm not a politician, and I understand the importance of politics if you want to govern. I understand the need to have that delicate balance between the politics and doing the work, and I'm learning that balance because it's important. But yeah, I see myself as a servant of the people. I love to serve humanity. It's what I've always wanted to do, and I don't know how it would play out, and it happens to be in a political space.
Okay, one of the first things I'd like to mention here is that the abject poverty to which he refers is sadly true, and not just in Joburg, but across South Africa. And another issue that faces all of us is just how poor the conditions of our state medical facilities are. Being a quadriplegic with cerebral palsy, I've had to have several surgeries in my life, and I'm very fortunate that my parents had the means to put me in privately run hospitals, because state hospitals, quite frankly, are death traps. This is not to say that there are no caring or qualified people working in state hospitals, because there are, but they are also vastly understaffed, under-resourced, and poorly mismanaged at the top, oftentimes. Because, like with many things in South Africa, the government officials who are supposed to run these things simply don't care. So that's probably why she felt so frustrated and felt the need to get into politics.
So let's just go back a little to the November 2021 election. After the votes were counted, the Johannesburg has 270 seats. Let's just lay the groundwork there. So you need 136 seats to govern. The ANC came in with 91, the DA 71, Action SA 44, EFF 29. So a coalition between yourself and Action SA would still leave you 21 seats short. There wasn't a coalition until the last minute. It was almost that Action SA, or certainly Herman Mashaba's told us, that he wanted to put you into government or to make you the mayor. How did all of this work out, and was it a surprise?
It was a surprise. I mean, I went in believing, I'm a person of faith. So I really believed that something would happen. I didn't know what and I didn't know how it would happen. But I believed something would happen because I would have had to have a very strong conviction to even start the journey in the first place. And that's what brought me here. But when I went to that election that morning, I only had 26% of the vote, no coalition partners, in spite of weeks of trying to put a coalition together. There's absolutely no success, not even a single partner on our side. And so I went there and just waited it out and waited to see what would happen. We started observing a trend, of course, in other parts of the country that morning, where we saw the EFF voting in DA mayors in other parts of the country. And we sort of got a sense that, the pattern was likely to repeat itself in Johannesburg. It was around lunchtime, I remember, when Helen Zille asked me, "Do you have an acceptance speech?" And I said, "Actually, I don't," And she said, "Well, I think you should start writing one because it looks like it's coming here as well." And that's when I brought out my laptop and started writing my acceptance speech. And yes, that evening I was elected mayor. As I said, I'm a person of faith and I believed it would happen. I just didn't know how. So it was quite rewarding to see that indeed it did happen.
And then you put together a coalition of 10 parties, or certainly that's what was reported in the media back a year ago. How did that work out, and who were the 10 parties? Because if you take those 4 major parties out, there were 18 political parties in total who had seats in the Johannesburg Council.
That's correct. And it is quite a mammoth task doing the number crunching and trying to see what different permutations would give us the 136 that we were aiming for. And effectively, you want more than just 136 because you don't want to be just on the fence. You want to have enough cushioning or enough reserves that if somebody's off sick or somebody's absent for whatever reason, you're still able to run the business of council, particularly where you need an absolute majority. And so, yes, we started doing that. We approached everyone to look at who we could potentially work with. And we ended up with 10 parties, but soon 2 of those parties exited the coalition. The first one was Al Jamar, where we realized that the person that we were negotiating with actually did not have a mandate from his party to negotiate with us, even though he had attended even the signing of the coalition agreement. He did not have his party's mandate, and so they nullified everything that happened in that negotiation process. So they exited the coalition.
One of the things I think I should explain here is the reason why there are so many small political parties in South Africa, because I know that might sound strange given that we're not that big of a country, particularly when compared to somewhere like the United States. But the reason why so many smaller political parties pop up, one of the reasons anyway, is that if a party can get enough support for its MPs to reach Parliament, then as MPs they receive a salary from the state. So there is a financial incentive for someone to found a political party, because once they get into Parliament, there's the financial benefits and perks that I mentioned.
The other one was a party that came in through another one of our partners. I believe it was the APC that came in through the ATM, where ATM said, we usually work together with this party. So if you're going to work with us, can you make room for them as well? And we were happy to do that. But later on, they came back and they said, no, we never approached them directly, and they're actually not part of our coalition. So we had to excuse them as well. So we ended up with 8 parties. But later on, if you recall, we added the Patriotic Alliance, making us a 9-party coalition of 140 seats. We thought we were really stable, really comfortable. We were 4 seats in excess of the 136 that we needed, and we thought we had the numbers we needed to govern without any disturbance until 2026.
And then the Patriotic Alliance thought otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the nature of politics, is that you just never know when somebody will be offered something that you can't offer them. And yes, that's exactly what happened with the Patriotic Alliance. I mean, with their 8 seats, unfortunately, they decided to switch sides, and that's what brought us where we are here today.
Just by way of background, when the Patriotic Alliance stood for election ahead of the November 2021 vote, was it like so many other parties that they want the ANC out, or were they really just looking to look after their community? Because they got a lot of votes. They got over 50,000 votes in that election.
Well, PA voters will tell you that they voted for the PA because they wanted the ANC out and they trusted that the Patriotic Alliance would help them do that. But the Patriotic Alliance has always been clear. I mean, at least the leadership has always been clear in their interest, and that their interest is money and opportunities, jobs and contracts for their people. And we're seeing that play out. I mean, sometimes when someone tells you who they are, you must believe them the first time, or otherwise you learn the hard way. And that's what we're seeing. So they had one portfolio in our coalition, which was the health and social development portfolio. It wasn't what they wanted initially. They wanted 2 portfolios, but we only had one to give, which was actually occupied by the Freedom Front Plus. So they actually made room in order for the Patriotic Alliance to be accommodated in the coalition in order to strengthen our numbers. And FF Plus then moved over to the legislative side, and they took up an oversight position, a chairperson position. And that was the compromise that brought us there. But PA was always clear from the very beginning that they actually wanted 2 portfolios. And they were very clear on which portfolios they wanted. And I believe one of them was economic development. It's quite interesting to see that even in the coalition they're part of now, they didn't even get economic development, but they ended up with transport and housing.
So, what does this tell us now about the next election? Because in 2024, clearly the ANC, on current indications, are going to be below 50%. How much below 50%, only time will tell. But then we're going to be doing more of the coalition politics at that point in time. And from where you sit, having been in the fire for the last 10 months, how are you seeing that, or what lessons have you learned here that you can take back to the DA as a whole for the national election in only, 18 months' time?
I think there's lessons all around, and it's not just lessons for the Democratic Alliance. I think there's a lot of lessons for the electorate as well. I don't think that our voters understand the numbers game in politics and in governance. I don't think they get it. I think a lot of voters think, well, I'm going to vote for the party that I like and we see what happens. But I don't think they're strategic enough to say, what does it mean if we've split the vote so much that a municipality is hung? And, what does it mean that we've split it so much that you end up with a coalition of so many parties that it becomes almost impossible to govern? So I certainly think while coalitions can be a good thing and they can work, and we see them working in other parts of the world, of course, there's legal frameworks that support coalitions to work. For instance, in the last DA mayoral breakaway, we had a delegation from Denmark, and one of the speakers was a former mayor and current deputy mayor. And one of the things she shared was that there's no motions of no confidence in Denmark. It's not allowed by law, and that if you're a mayor, it's expected of you to finish your term, and that it's even difficult for you to resign. You need council permission to resign. Even if you're sick, you need to ask permission, and council can still say no. So those are the kinds of laws that make it easier to keep stable governments in other parts of the world where they've had coalitions for many, many years. Now, our laws here are different, and perhaps it's time to review our laws as South Africa, because our laws were developed at a time when we had a single party, a majority rule. So much has changed since then, and perhaps the lawmakers need to come together and say, well, do we need some reform, given what's happening now? And this
the issues she's discussing here with the occurrence of vote splitting really just illustrates how deep tribal culture runs in South Africa. People don't tend to think of the big picture, and that's because the whole idea of sticking with your own people, sticking with your own tribe, is very deeply rooted across the class gaps, across race gaps, and we see how this plays out in terms of the conflict that often breaks out in various places around South Africa. For instance, although people from other parts of the world tend to think of the African continent as one big homogeneous landmass, it's really not. Africans from other parts of Africa, so from outside this country, are very often looked down upon by native South Africans and sadly often treated with violence and mistrust. So, what she's talking about here is very real, and it is one of the things that holds us back as a country.
The stability that the country needs. I believe cities are key to the development of nations. I believe that Johannesburg, as a city in South Africa, being the economic hub, is quite key. We contribute 15% of the country's GDP. Now, you can't afford for South Africa to have an unstable city of Johannesburg. And that's where the lawmakers need to really assist us so that we stabilize our coalitions should we end up in coalitions. But I certainly think it's easier to govern if you have a full mandate, a clear mandate. It's certainly easier. And I see it with some of our counterparts in Midvaal, in the city of Cape Town, for instance, and in many of the municipalities in the Western Cape, where other DA mayors are able to govern, and they govern well, and they're able to showcase after the 5-year term what they've been able to do. Whereas here you spend so much time in negotiations and consultations, and it's really time consuming. It is. It has to be done when that's what the electorate has given you. And we have a commitment. We've made the commitment to the residents of Johannesburg that we will make it work. And that's why you see me standing and fighting today still.
Indeed. You have taken the motion of no confidence or your firing as mayor to court. What's behind that?
Do you know, we're in a democratic state and we embrace democracy and we understand the importance of democracy. However, where our democracy is under attack through processes that have no regard for the rule of law, for the rules of council, that is hugely problematic. It's not something that can be entertained or even promoted or protected. And what happened that day was completely unlawful. So many things were wrong, that were done wrong, from the programming committee and how it was put together, how it was set up, and how it was run, to the actual council meeting itself. Programming is a committee of council. It's one of the Section 79 oversight committees, if you like, and it's a committee that decides, for instance.
Just to clarify, what she's talking about here and saying was done incorrectly was that she was recently removed from her position as the mayor of Joburg because some of the members of her coalition government switched sides and joined the ANC.
On the agenda of every council meeting and so on. Now, this meeting was called within a 3-hour notice period. Ordinarily, you'd have about a 72-hour notice period. Reports would be circulated so that members of programming are able to go through them, consider them, so that when they come together and debate whether or not those reports are admissible and should be allowed to go through to council, they're well informed, and if there's a need to even consult their legal experts, they're able to do so. This did not happen this time around. You had a programming committee meeting that was called at very short notice. 3 hours is ridiculous, particularly after the speaker had made a pronouncement at the end of the last council meeting that we'd only have a special council meeting after recess, which was only after the 10th of October. So for her to have just changed her mind overnight and expect that people have not made other plans, people have not traveled just before recess, was ridiculous and unreasonable at best. However, that's not the only reason of the programming committee. Programming has representatives from different political parties. It's very carefully constituted for representation. So to make sure that all parties are well represented and that there's fairness in terms of the distribution of voices in that programming committee. Now, what we saw here is we saw a programming committee that did not correct, and they were not supposed to go ahead with an incorrect programming committee. It should have been called off and it should have been adjourned for another time when you could have people forming a quorum. That did not happen. They went ahead. The last thing about the programming is that they then tabled a motion which was declared inadmissible, which was the motion of no confidence in the executive mayor, which was declared inadmissible by a previous programming committee based on the rules of council. One of the rules says if there's a matter or one of the issues raised in that motion is before the courts or it's before a Section 79 committee of council, such a motion is not admissible. It cannot be considered by council. Now, one of the things that they mentioned in their motion was a matter that's currently before the courts, where Herman Mashaba has taken the public protector to court, and the motion was rendered inadmissible based on that. However, this incorrect programming committee forced this motion through to a council meeting that was called for the following day. Again, no adequate notice for this council meeting, and the council meeting was illegal itself because it did not observe the rules of council. They went ahead and they considered this inadmissible motion, and that's how I was then illegally ousted. They went ahead then and elected a mayor without notice. You're supposed to issue notice as the speaker if there's going to be an election, such an important position, such as the position of mayor of the city. You cannot just elect a mayor on a whim. And this is exactly what happened. You know, the IC was there and there was a short caucus break, and
All the stuff she's talking about here just further illustrates the clash between Western democratic ideals and autocratic tribal leadership, which characterizes much of how South Africa is run. The fact is, she's correct. ANC politicians do not care about the rule of law. They do not care about following proper process. Hell, they don't even care about doing the jobs into which they are elected. What they care about is using those jobs as leverage to enrich themselves and those they care about. That's it. They wouldn't care if the country literally burned around them as long as them and their own were looked after.
they set up and there was an election of a mayor. So the whole thing was illegal. Whole thing was a farce, and it's on those grounds that we're going to court.
So let's just say you win in court and there is another vote. The way things stacked up with the PA now being part of the ANC and its alliance, surely it's unlikely that you would get re-elected, or have you got something else up your sleeve?
So we are in talks with various political parties. Like I said, we're not going to go down without a fight. This is a fight worth fighting. We're very concerned about this corrupt cabal that's taken over the city. We believe that their only agenda is to loot the city's coffers, and we believe we have a constitutional duty to our residents to protect the ratepayers' money, to protect the city's budget, and to make sure that services are rendered with the money that they contribute towards the city and whatever we get from other spheres of government. So yes, we're in talks with various parties. There's various negotiations at all tiers of government, national, provincial, and local. And it's still early days, but I'm quite hopeful that we will be able to A, be reinstated, and B, remain in government.
Well, certainly the statement that you issued yesterday was very hard hitting. Once again, describing the ANC as corrupt, something which we've heard from many people now in South Africa, including your federal chair, Helen Zille, who calls it a criminal syndicate. There was suggestions that you were going to get sued because of this. What came of that?
Nothing, absolutely nothing, because it was absurd to even accuse me of defaming a political party. You can't defame a political party, you can defame an individual. But also, I was stating a fact. This is a well known fact. In fact, I had hordes and hordes of South Africans echoing what I said, instead of calling on me to also apologize. So it shows that everybody knows the ANC is corrupt. But if you look at what's happening in the city now, that corruption is already playing out. Some of the changes that they've already brought about in the few weeks that they've been in this illegal administration, they've told all the boards of entities to stop meeting, stop making any decisions. In fact, they want all board decisions from the 1st of September. Mind you, they only came in on the 1st of October. They want all those decisions to be put in abeyance. And we believe that these are targeted interventions targeting a certain entity where certain crucial decisions were made that they don't agree with. It's to protect one of their own from the corruption allegations that they were faced with, where they were about to be charged and they had been placed on special leave. We're seeing the city's Group Forensic and Investigation Services Unit now having a vacancy in the group head position, where we had somebody acting in that role since General Shadrach Sibia went back to the SAPS. We're now seeing that they've since removed the person that was acting and they've left it vacant. That in itself is telling. They've gone and made sure that Group Forensic and Investigations is not able to do its job, which is corruption busting. That's one of the things that's really quite concerning. We're seeing key appointments, acting appointments, where they've moved people around. They've brought back people with questionable pasts, people who've been charged in the past by the SIU and various other organizations, including our very own Group Forensic Investigation Services Unit, which has investigated certain individuals. We're seeing those people back in key positions in the city in a very short space of time. All of this suggests that there's only one agenda in mind, and we need to move with speed to stop them in their tracks.
It sounds absurd when you are a ratepayer in this city of ours and seeing everything that you've listed, certainly what Herman Mashaba disclosed when he was mayor as well, and yet it looks like we're going back again. Is there any hope on the horizon here when we look at, for instance, Nelson Mandela Bay, where there was clean governance for a period, then there was a very similar situation, it appears, to the one that you are facing, which then really drove the city down into the troughs, and finally they have managed to put together a coalition there. I think it's a 9-party coalition, which does appear to be doing things to the benefit of the ratepayers. Is there anything that you're seeing on the horizon here which does give people like me who pay my rates every month and wonder why they're so high some hope?
I think we're grateful that you have a democratic alliance that's not giving up without a fight. We could have just said, well, what's happened has happened, let's move on, let's sit in opposition benches and we'll see our voters in 2026. But we're thinking about you, the ratepayer. You don't deserve what's happening. You don't deserve what's coming. You deserve a government that's going to stand up and fight for you. And as the Democratic Alliance, that's the position we've taken, that we're going to fight for you. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're starting the fight in the courts. We're taking the fight to political quarters, where we're engaging with parties to see what we could do to rebuild and reconstitute a coalition that'll be for the people. And that's really part of the fight. So that's the hope that I can give you in the immediate term. I do think that there's hope for 2024 and 2026. I believe that what's unfolding now is a practical lesson for our voters. I think that voters are now keenly interested in what's happening, and they're interested in knowing how they can use their vote more strategically and more powerfully to influence the trajectory of things going forward. And I think that this is an opportunity for us as politicians. It's an opportunity for legislators and everyone else to really invest in voter education and looking at what we can do to empower the person on the ground to understand what their vote really means.
As much as I respect her attitude and hope that she is correct in her belief that things can be turned around in the city of Joburg and for South Africa more generally, one of the reasons that the ANC has been able to remain in power for so long, despite being as corrupt as everyone knows they are, is that they are extremely adept at utilizing racial politics and the memory of apartheid to mobilize and manipulate the voter base in their favor. Something that I don't think outsiders will understand is how deep the wounds of apartheid go, and just how suspicious the average black South African can be of anything that is, whether in fact or in fiction, tied to the control of white people. And for many years now, the ANC has successfully been able to characterize the Democratic Alliance as a white party, even though Mpho Phalatse here is obviously not white. What the ANC does is that they claim that any black official or representative of the Democratic Alliance is simply a puppet for white interest.
Dr. Phalatse, just to close off with, it's been very interesting to us at Biz News, given that Rob Hersoff, twice at our conference, made some very strong statements about corruption and how he would be supporting parties that fight this. And yet he is a big supporter of the Patriotic Alliance, which in this case, certainly from your perspective, have put a corrupt administration back into power here in the Johannesburg City Council. And they've done some interesting things in other parts of the country as well. What would your message, of any, be to a guy like Rob Hersoff, who's funding Gayton McKenzie and his cohorts?
Just for context, the Rob Hersoff to which they are referring here is one of the most wealthy and influential businessmen in South Africa. He comes from very old money because his family founded several businesses that have existed for, I think it's well over 100 years, and he's got international support, international contacts. So Rob Hersoff is a big mover and shaker in the South African social structure.
We in Johannesburg observing very closely developments that are happening in PA-run portfolios. So they're sitting with housing and transport as we speak. And yesterday, I think they issued communication to the staff that all procurement should be stopped that's happening in those portfolios. Now, it could be for one of two reasons, and it would be interesting to observe keenly as to what reason is driving this. It could be that they're aware of corruption in those portfolios and that they're trying to stop it from happening, or it could be that they want to control procurement and that they want to channel contracts towards themselves.
To clarify, when they talk about procurement, that is the term that's used to refer to government allocation of contracts. So deciding who gets to do what in any given city or municipal area.
Now, if you look at how the Patriotic Alliance has operated in the past in the city of Johannesburg when they were in coalition with the ANC, there were issues at the Joburg market of a similar nature, of interference in procurement. And I'm leaning towards the possibility that they wanted to start to do the same thing, which would be sad because I worked at them in the health portfolio. I had no sense of such activities. It could be that now their partnership with the ANC is fertile ground for them to start behaving in a similar pattern. We are keeping a close eye on things. We will communicate. We will expose corruption. Whether we're in government or in opposition, we will expose it. And I hope that funders will be looking at this and that they will reconsider where to put their money.
Dr. Mpho Phalatse is the Johannesburg leader of the Democratic Alliance, and I'm Alec Hogg from biznews.com.
Well, I hope that this interview has given you some context for the political dynamics in South Africa, because the reason I chose to cover this is, as they said, Johannesburg is South Africa's economic hub. It's very important to how our country functions as a whole. So in many ways, as Johannesburg goes, so goes the rest of South Africa. And if Joburg is falling apart, it bodes ill for the rest of the country, and we'll all suffer for it. Anyway, that's all I've got for today, and for now, farewell.